Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So on today's episode, I got a brand new deck for you that I am calling Revenge of the Dorks. And if you aren't familiar with the 1984 film Revenge of the Nerds, well, this name just might go over your head, and that's okay. Regardless, Mana Dorks are something that, well, I have kind of bashed in the past, or maybe not bashed necessarily, but said that they are, in my opinion, overvalued by many in Commander. The vast majority of the Mana Dorks that see play are in green, and green also has access to the best land ramp cards, and land ramp is a much safer way to ramp in Commander. Right or wrong, lands are essentially protected by the social contract in Commander, so yeah, Armageddon really doesn't get cast in most casual games. But wraths that destroy all creatures, like, Blasphemous Act or Wrath of God, etc., very much do see plenty of play in Commander. So yeah, ramping with Mana Dorks is a lot more risky, which is why I try to pretty much avoid it when possible. But on this episode, I decided to do the exact opposite and lean into Mana Dorks and see just how powerful we can make these little dorks in a deck. So for every single time that your opponents have cast a Wrath of God and wiped out your Mana Dorks, well, now they are seeking revenge. And one thing real quick, every single card in this deck outside of the Commander is less than $1, so this deck is very budget friendly. But yeah, how are these tiny little Mana Dorks going to become a deadly force that can easily take out all of your opponents? Well, let's jump into it to find out. First up, the commander for our Mana Dork army is none other than Najeela the Blade Blossom. Najeela is a 5-color commander, a 3/2 human warrior that costs 2 in a red. She has, whenever a warrior attacks, she may have its controller create a 1/1 white warrior creature token that's tapped and attacking. And by paying Wooburg, you untap all attacking creatures. They gain trample, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. After this phase, the initial combat phase, activate this only during combat. So Najeela is an incredibly powerful commander, and a commander that can essentially turn our Mana Dorks into an unstoppable force once we're set up correctly. And just before anyone comments below, yes, I know that Druid's Repository is a card, but it's out of the budget for this deck. Regardless where we're going, we don't need Druid's Repository because we've got Mana Dorks! Essentially, our goal for this deck is pretty simple. Get enough and the right combination of Mana Dorks in play that can essentially tap for Wooburg together. Now, just doing that really isn't going to do all that much for us because, again, Najeela does say untap all attacking creatures. So in order for our Mana Dorks to actually untap, they have to be attacking, and generally when you're attacking, you are tapped and not able to tap for mana. So another piece that we need to actually make this deck work is Vigilance. By giving our team Vigilance, we then can attack with our Mana Dorks and also tap for mana to pay for that Wooburg to untap our attacking creatures. Now that still, most likely, is not the last piece that we need, because obviously if we are attacking with our Mana Dorks, well, they very well might get taken out because Mana Dorks tend to be very tiny. And actually, Najeela herself only has 2 toughness as well, so yeah, she can get taken out pretty easily too. So on top of Mana Dorks that add up to Wooburg and Vigilance, we also need to be able to give our team Indestructibility. So then we can freely swing out with our team of Mana Dorks and Najeela and those warriors that we're getting from Najeela attacking. Then we can, tap our Mana Dorks still for mana because again they have Vigilance, and then use that mana to untap all of our attacking creatures, give all of them trample, lifelink, haste until end of turn, and then we get an extra combat, and then we, swing again, and then we do that again, and again, and again, and you see where this is going. Basically, infinite combat Mana Dork shenanigans. Or at least enough to essentially take out all of our opponents. Even if they've got enough blockers in play and bigger creatures, unless all those creatures are indestructible, well, eventually our creatures are going to wear their creatures down and our opponents are going to lose. And actually, we can also get a ton of mana as well if we happen to be tapping for more than Wooburg with our mana dorks too. But again, that's kind of beside the point and kind of overkill because, yeah, basically all the combats that we need is just what we need to win. So now that we know the commander and the plan for this deck, what are those mana dorks, what are those vigilant cards, and what are those indestructible cards that we need to make this deck work? First up, let's start off with the stars of the show, the Mana Dorks, starting off with Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves, and Avacyn's Pilgrim at 1 mana apiece. Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves going to tap for a green, and Avacyn's Pilgrim's going to tap for a white. Now, yes, there are more 1 mana Mana Dorks out there, but the vast majority of them are tapping for a green, and, well, we only need so many Mana Dorks that can actually tap for a green, because that's kind of what the basis of what many Mana Dorks do. Again, we want a wider selection of Mana Dorks that can tap for a wider variety of colors because, again, we really need to generate exactly Wooburg. So next up, we've got Quirion Elves, Quirion Explorer, and Gaia Ranger. Quirion Elves can tap for a green, but it can also tap for 1 more color depending on what we picked when it came into play. And then Quirion Explorer can tap for 1 mana of any color that a landed opponent controls could produce. Next up, Gaia Engineer can tap for green and blue, so actually this can basically be 2 mana dorks for us in a way. Moving on though, next up let's talk about Radha Heir to Keld and Catilda Dawnheart Prime. Radha actually doesn't need Vigilance to actually give us mana because whenever Radha attacks we add red. But again, for the rest of our mana dorks, we pretty much are going to need Vigilance anyways, so Radha in a way can also act as 2 mana dorks for us. She can attack, add red to our mana pool, and then also tap for a green. And then Catilda Dawnheart Prime can actually help out a few of our creatures, including our commander, by basically turning them into mana dorks. She has human creatures you control have tap add 1 mana of any of this creature's colors. Next up, we've got some 2 mana dorks that can tap for 1 of 3 colors with Rattleclaw Mystic, Druid of the Enema, and Urborg Elf. Rattleclaw Mystic taps for Temur colors, Druid of the Enema taps for Naya colors, and Urborg Elf taps for Sultai colors. Next up though, we've actually got some mana dorks that can help us filter our mana with Skyshroud Elf, Knotvine Mystic, and Yorlok of Scorched Thrash. Skyshroud Elf can tap for a green, but it also has pay 1, add red or white to your mana pool. So Skyshroud Elf can help us utilize duplicates of mana from other mana dorks. If we're missing red or white or both, this can really help us actually fill those needs. Speaking of which, Knotvine Mystic has pay 1, tap, add red, green, white to your mana pool. And then Yorlok of Scorched Thrash has Vigilance, and a player losing unspent mana causes that player lose that much life, and by paying 1 we tap and each player adds black, red, green. So obviously it can help us filter our mana, and actually it can bring mana burn back, which can be pretty fun. If somehow an opponent is able to stop us from winning through combat, maybe like they have a fog or something like that, well, now we can take them out with mana burn. And finally, I also want to highlight some creatures that can actually tap to untap our mana dorks, or basically any of our other permanents with Hura's Follower, Vizier of Tumbling Sands, and Kelpie Guide. Each of these simply have tap, untap another permanent you control, so again, if we've got a mana dork that can tap for more than 1 color, well, we can utilize them twice. And speaking of tapping for more than 1 color, of course we've got some fantastic mana dorks like Ornithopter Paradise, Drover the Mighty, and Gemhide Sliver that can tap for any color. So yeah, mana dorks like these can easily help us fill any need that we have for mana. So of course we're also going to be running Root Coil Creeper, Paradise Root, and Elysian Carotid. And on top of being able to tap for 1 mana of any color, Paradise Root also has Hexrift as long as it's untapped. And then Elysian Carotid can actually tap for 2 mana if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, but usually that's not going to be the case, but that's okay. We've also got some 3 mana mana dorks with Alloy Mirror, Opaline Unicorn, and Scuttlemutt. Yeah, that's right, we're utilizing a mirror, a unicorn, and a scarecrow in this deck. And again, the reason for that is each of them can tap for 1 mana of any color. Speaking of which, we've also got Rift Sower and Hiran Blade Elite. Rift Sower actually has to spend 2 for a green, so it can be a fantastic turn 1 play. And then Hiran Blade Elite says, whenever a human enters the battlefield under your control, you get a +1 counter on Hiran Blade Elite, and then it can tap to add X mana of any 1 color where X is its power. So again, this definitely has the potential to tap for more than 1 mana. Moving on though, we've got some somewhat mana dorks with Jaspera Sentinel and Loam Dryad. Each of these has tap an untapped creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. So yeah, these kind of in a way can utilize our commander, which generally isn't a mana dork for us, to tap for mana. Next up, we've got Wirewood Channeler, which can tap for a ton of mana. It has tap add X mana of any 1 color or X the number of elves on the battlefield. And yeah, we're gonna have plenty of elves in this deck with all the mana dorks that we have. Now, as great as this and a lot of the other mana dorks in this deck are, there is one that stands well above the rest. And that would be the Golden Pig of this deck, the number 1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Jegantha the Wellspring. Jegantha is a 5/5 elemental elk that costs 4 and a Gruul. It is not our companion, so I don't need to read that part, and it has tap add Wooburg. This mana can't be spent to pay generic mana cost. Well, luckily for us, there is absolutely nothing generic about Najeela's cost, so yeah. This is basically a mana dork that can, on its own, activate Najeela. So literally with just this and our commander, and a way to give this vigilance and probably indestructible, we win. So yeah, Jegantha being the mana dork of all mana dorks, being able to essentially pay for Najeela on its own. You are fantastic, and that is why you are the golden pig of this deck. Regardless, again, like I said, Jegantha cannot do it on its own. Okay, well, I mean, it can do it without the other mana dorks, but not without other pieces. And the first of those other pieces are ways to, well, essentially give our creatures vigilance with creatures like Copperhorn Scout, On-Crop Champion, and Plarg Dean of Chaos. Copperhorn Scout has, whenever it attacks, untap each other creature you control. So again, it's kind of like a version of pseudo-vigilance, and again, if we can untap our mana dorks, then we can tap them for mana to activate Najeela to untap all of our creatures, which untaps our mana dorks, and Copperhorn Scout. And then On-Crop Champion is essentially the exact same thing for this deck. It basically says, you may exert On-Crop Champion as it attacks. When you do, untap all the creatures you control. And then Plarg Dean of Chaos, well, actually, okay, the front could be relevant, I guess. It can tap to discard a card to draw a card, but most of the time, we're going to be utilizing the backside of this card with Augusta, Dean of Order. She has, whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. Basically, again, your creatures are going to untap when they attack, so again, pseudo-vigilance. But of course, aside from these, we actually have some ways to just straight up give our creatures vigilance with Sarah's Blessing, Hold the Gates, and Brave the Sands. Sarah's Blessing and Hold the Gates are just going to give our creatures vigilance, and Brave the Sands gives them vigilance and makes it so that each creature we control can block an additional creature, which might come in handy. And speaking of coming in handy, we also have Always Watching and Thraben Watcher, which are essentially the exact same thing, but one's an enchantment and one's a creature. They're going to give non-token creatures we control +1/+1 and vigilance. So again, with vigilance, we are free to swing out with our mana dorks, and yeah, still tap them for mana. But again, actually, we kind of are not completely free to attack because, again, our mana dorks tend to be very, very small. And if we attack with them and our opponent's block, well, they're going to go away. But like I mentioned before, we've got ways to ensure that that does not happen. So, of course, we've got ways to grant our team indestructibility with things like Frontline Medic and Stalwart Pathfinder. Frontline Medic has Battalion. Whenever it and at least 2 other creatures attack, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So yeah, we're always going to be meeting that requirement when we're going to be going infinite because yeah, we need mana dorks to make this work. And then Stalwart Pathfinder has at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So typically this is going to be a pretty easy requirement for us to meet most of the time. But we also have some ways to grant indestructibility just for the turn, which again is all we need if we're going to be going infinite, with things like Linvala, Shield of Seagate, and Selfless Glyph Weaver. Linvala has a lot of text, but the part that matters for us is sacrifice Linvala, choose Hexproof for indestructible, creatures you control gain that ability until end of turn. So this can of course protect our creatures in combat, or from a board wipe or target removal, etc, etc, etc. And then Selfless Glyph Weaver has exile it, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, which again, most of the time is going to get the job done for us. Again, like I mentioned before, one of the big downsides of mana dorks is that, well, it's not really protected ramp like land ramp is. But in this deck, again, we are actually incentivized to run quite a few ways to protect them with things like indestructibility, so yeah, we've got some extra protection there. Because we're also going to be running cards like Rootborn Defenses, Make a Stand, and Unbreakable Formation. Rootborn Defenses says populate, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Make a Stand says creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. In Unbreakable Formation, well, it definitely was competing with Jegantha for the Golden Pig Award because it says creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and there's an addendum because if we cast a spell during our main phase, we get a +1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. So yeah, this one card gives our creatures indestructible and vigilance as long as we cast it during our main phase, which we can, yeah, easily do. And then we swing with our mana dorks and we win. Or I guess I should say we swing, then swing again, and again, and again, and then we win. And we're not quite done with our indestructible spells just yet. We also have Ready, Willing, and Join Shields. Ready says creature you control are indestructible this turn, untap each creature you control, and Willing says creature you control gain Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. So obviously each of these sides can help us out, but Ready is more likely going to be what we're using, though we can fuse it and get both. And then Join Shield says untap all creatures you control, they gain Hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, so yeah, this can protect our team in multiple ways. Aside from protecting our team though, some ways to throw a wrench into our opponent's plans are things like Rip Apart, Despark, Mythos of Deathroy, Crush Contraband, Aether Gale, and Dust to Dawn. And finally, of course, we've got some ways to draw quite a few cards with things like Epiphany of the Drowned Yard, Breathe the Runes, Commander's Insight, Divider's Portent, Mind Spring, Shamanic Revelation, Camaraderie, Biomantic Mastery, and Overflowing Insight. Okay, now I'm winded because that was a lot of cards. And speaking of a lot of cards, we have made it through every single non-land card in this deck, so now it's time for us to jump into the price. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, this deck is very budget friendly. Even though the commander is $8.27, every other card in the deck is less than $1. So again, even with that nearly $10 commander, the total cost of the deck is just $35.67. And also keep in mind that this cost actually includes basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those, there's some savings there. And speaking of savings, if you buy this deck on TCG Player and utilize heavily played and damaged cards, you can save even more. Though also keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.